So, dear friend and colleague Ann Blake, we had already planned on having you back on the podcast, but after the first podcast had aired, I looked at all the comments and all the feedback, and I have a general gauge as to what the average response will be from the audience if I have a guest that they don't know.
Yeah.
You know, if I have Bob, you know, other kind of regular co-hosts, people know them. But when I have like someone new, I don't really know how people will receive these folks. And like I said, I have an average gauge of what is. The response was far above average. I was happy because I see you as a smart, wonderful, wise, helpful, warm person, genuine person, and I am glad that a lot of other people really picked up on that, even though we were talking about theory and whatnot. So I am glad to have you back. Welcome back to the podcast,
Thank
Dan.
you so much.
So what are you going to give us today?
Well, before we go there, to say to you and to the audience, thank you so much. I'm really pleased, of course, that you and I offered something that was useful and communicative. And as I said to you in emails or text, it's also, I think, about our relationship and our genuineness with each other and our chemistry together. That comes through. We're used to videos these days more than we are to audios, and so that comes through. I'm just so happy and thrilled and gratified and appreciative.
It's the Swedish side, and all those meetings we sat next to each other.
Yes, indeed. And just recently at a memorial. Yeah, we sat next to each other. Just happenstance. We call it synchronicity in the Jungian world. But So I'm happy to be here, and it's a nice, moderately sunny, chilly day, and we can look out onto the trees, which is lovely. I'm going to talk about one of my favorite things, like the song from The Sound of Music. But before we go there, let me say this, please. As we begin, I acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people past and present, the people of the inside. I honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe members. We are guests on this land, irrespective of whether we live in Seattle or are actually visiting from elsewhere. The Duwamish tribe is a non-federally recognized tribe. The Coast Salish people is comprised by a group of ethnically and linguistically related indigenous people of the Pacific Northwest Coast living in BC, Canada, and U.S. states of Washington and Oregon. And the members of these tribes speak one of many Coast Salish languages. And again, we are honored and appreciative of being here on this day. I'm going to talk today about, again, one of my favorite things. It's called the I'm From poem. And it's a poetic format that I've been exposed to. I'll talk about that in a minute. And as I looked into it in preparation for another presentation similar to this, I realized that, for one thing, it comes out of a woman who I'll cite in a moment. And then the University of Minnesota, I grew up in Minnesota, uses it for their incoming class members. I call it a memoir poem. At some time, maybe, I will write my memoir and use these paragraphs as chapters. I don't know if that'll come to fruition, but I'd love to do that. So this poem, we can create unique descriptions of contributions from family, community, culture, nationality, etc. to our personal history. So it's really autobiographical. And it invites personal creativity in content and format. Initial guidelines suggest inclusion of sensory memories, seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, touching, childhood and adult traditions and celebrations.
So this is a format of writing your own poem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where there's like a prompt.
Yeah, the prompt is I'm from.
And then you just write the rest of that.
Exactly.
And it has to be a poem, or it could be prose, or whatever.
Could be anything one wants.
Whatever
That's the
say.
creative process.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
So this is the suggestions of where you might go.
Yes.
I see.
So I'm reading at the moment, as you can tell. Childhood and adult traditions and celebrations, losses and gains, any and all information that describes personal experiences that contribute to creating our lives. So this is like birth to current. Somebody suggested to me that I might write, I'm from in terms of the future, and another person suggested I might write the shadow rather than the positives that I tend to write about. Mine is now 5 pages long. And so kind of the opposite, the yin-yang opposite of what it might look like.
So you just start and you have this prompt as it's written, and then you just start going, and then you might come from a different angle if you write it again.
Absolutely, yeah.
How does it feel to write it?
Well, as I said, it's one of my favorite things. I love this format. I was exposed to it in a workshop. Then let me get the name of that here. Years ago, 2019, just before COVID, I went to a workshop called Internalized Sexism and White Privilege, a workshop for white women, sponsored by Cultures Connecting. And Caprice Hollins and Ilse Govan are co-founders of that. And so they have an organization that addresses racism and sexism. So this 2-day workshop, one of the exercises was this poem. They invite us to start this poem, and then they'd stop every once in a while, and several people would read parts of their poem. And I just took to it. I just love this format. And so I've worked on it since 2019.
Where did you go in that moment? I'm curious. I could see writing in that milieu having some interesting discoveries or disclosures or something. What did you write about?
Well, I certainly have. So I call it. I'm from parentheses ongoing, unending progressive poem. So I've worked on it and worked on it and worked on it. I added some stuff not too long ago.
So it's a work in progress.
Absolutely.
I see.
And I'm sure by now it's hard to tell where I started. It doesn't have to be chronological, of course. It can be anything. And I've tinkered with it so that it's more chronological than not. And I certainly started with family. And you and I were talking a moment ago, and I talked about my first father left really early in my life, so I talked about that. My parents got pregnant in Washington, D.C. during World War II. My dad was guarding, he was a Marine. He guarded a bridge that my mother went over to her work at one of the libraries. I always think it's the Library of Congress. I don't think so. So they met and messed around and got pregnant and went back to Minnesota and had me, and then he just wasn't doing well with whatever, being married, having a kid, I don't know. And so he left pretty darn soon. And so I certainly talked about that. And
how old were you?
Well, he came back for my baptism at 4 months.
Oh.
So he left really soon.
Yeah.
And then went away again. I don't know why he came for that. And then my mother remarried when I was about 3, and that father adopted me and was a really good dad. So, but still, that disruption that we were talking about earlier. So I certainly started with family and where I grew up. And I grew up on the iron ore range. We call it derange. In Minnesota, we have an accent that's specific to the iron ore range.
What does that sound like?
Well, derange instead of the range.
Like French sounding? That sounds French
Canadian-ish.
Okay.
I think. Well, and we have the world's largest open pit iron ore mine in Hibbing, Minnesota. And
I see. Da range.
Yeah, like, instead of the.
Like da bears.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, not deranged, but some people, of course, would say that in other parts of the state. And people came from all over, mostly Europe, probably completely Europe, to work in the mines. That's why they came to the city, to the area.
Yeah, my sister lives in Minnesota. She has for many years. Moved out there with her husband, and I was talking with her recently, and can't remember how this came up, but I think it was she's talking about her daughter, my niece Michelle. She's blonde and blue-eyed. So even though my sister is like me, dark hair, dark eyes, but because we have our mom with the blonde and blue eyes, and then her husband, a blonde, you have a blonde kid that's quarter Japanese. And I can't remember how this came up, but I was like, well, maybe it's because Michelle is kind of rare because, blonde, blue eyes, it's a little rarer than brown eyes and brown hair, just among white people even. And my sister said, oh, no. I can't remember what statistics she threw out. She said 80-90% of people here are blonde with blue eyes. And I'm like, 80-90%?
Yeah.
because even among white people, that's not common. And she's, oh, no, yeah, everyone is
Lots of Scandinavian.
very, very fair skinned, very light hair, yeah. And I thought, wow, that's white.
That's right.
That's white.
That. Yeah. Yeah. Being out in the sun we always had to put sunscreen on.
Yeah. And tall people.
Oh, tall.
I mean, that's what my sister says. Well, she's kind of short.
Over the generations. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
So when I visited my family in Sweden, my family has kept in contact. My great-grandmother came over in the mid-1800s, and one of the family members stayed in Sweden of the 5 children. And so there's always been some connection. So I've been over several times and feel very close to them. And
what region, I'm curious?
It's on the west side of Lake Vänern, which is the largest lake in Sweden. Oh. And there's this Insy-Binsy peninsula that has Tysse and Åmål. Oh. And those are the towns that I'm from.
My people are from Småland.
Oh, yeah.
Which is in the middle.
Yeah, this is Dalsland.
Where IKEA is from.
Yeah. Absolute.
Yeah.
So what I realized is in visiting my family there, that it's very much like Minnesota, one. And secondly, they have iron ore, and they have logging, and they have farming. Well, that's what Minnesota is. Yeah. So they came to, lots of Scandinavians, as well as, but lots of ethnic, in terms of the countries of Europe, came. When I was in school, the first paragraph of my I'm From is talking about the land acknowledgement for Minnesota. No people of color in my town, no indigenous people, and no people of color. When I went away to school in North Dakota, I was in social work, and one of our classmates was an indigenous person, which is really surprising in terms of the number of people who are still there. And we had a couple of athletes, football players, who were African American. But again, North Dakota, Minnesota, very, very Caucasian.
So when you think about that, the I'm From, and you focus on that, because that's what I was just briefly thinking where I would start I'm From. That's because I'm huge into genealogy. I have a lot of short-term memory facts that are ready to go.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Because I could bore everyone to tears with everything that I know about because it's so fascinating to me, and what it does for me is I can't put my finger on exactly what it is, but it's grounding, it's meaning making, it's fun, it's defining. There's so many things about knowing where I'm from that make me feel, I don't know, just I can't there's not a word that really describes it. It just makes me feel better in some way. Is it like that for you?
It's 3-dimensional. When I write this poem, it's 3-dimensional. It's not just facts. It's not like history, chronology, dates, and events. It's 3-dimensional for me.
Yeah.
It's so gratifying.
And if anyone's curious as to how you find out, because the vast majority of people have no idea even where to start to find this information. One is to find even a distant relative that might have already done all this work, because there's me and I have like a third cousin that the two of us, when we do all of our work, we don't reinvent the wheel, so we don't want anyone else to reinvent the wheel. So if you ask it, I'll give you like all sorts of reports that I've written and everything. And the way that we do it is primarily today through Ancestry.com.
Absolutely.
They have it's expensive, but there's so much data, and it's not like just looking it up. And you have to become good at understanding the difference between a record that might be referring to your ancestor or your relative and might not be. Because there's a lot of real bullshit websites out there that will say you're related to King Arthur or something, and they'll have literally a name that will trace all the way back, generations and generations, but it's complete hogwash or speculation or something. And so you have to become really good at understanding genealogical records, because once you go back 100 years, the amount of documents that are available, particularly for certain groups of people, like for Japanese people, it just doesn't even exist. And so you have to be real careful about what you accept as
Right.
as evidence, So that's the path, but it takes hours upon hours upon hours. I'll spend 8 hours on a Saturday and get like 0.1% down the road. It takes a long, long time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've got my mother's cousin in Minnesota, Jenny, who's done a lot of work. And then in Sweden, our cousin Marju, I just call them cousins. We have great grandparents in common. So I don't know what that removed and, the numbers are, but I just call them cousins. And Marju's done a lot of work as well. And so we have the benefit of that. And I'm thinking of Henry Louis Gates Jr.'s Finding Your Roots. I mean, he has a whole staff full of people to do all that work, and the census information, and a woman I call my foster daughter has done a lot of that work for herself, and she's given me a couple things as well. It's just incredibly informative, and it is grounding.
And just another asterisk is that even if, say, you're adopted, the DNA, if you submit it to Ancestry.com, will, and especially if you are in the United States, because there's a lot of people in the States that have done that, there's a good chance that it'll just tell you these two people are likely your parents.
Yes, absolutely.
And this person is very likely your brother or your half-brother or something, and then you can contact them, and they might have whole family trees that they've already worked out and stuff. So, it's pretty easy to use. Yeah, anyway.
I've done Ancestry.com, and then I gave as a gift to my sister, because she does a lot of my bookkeeping work for me really, but I'll call it with. And I identify very strongly with my Swedish side of the family, my maternal grandmother. And then I'm also English and Irish and German. And in my Ancestry.com, I came out 6% Swedish. Mm-hmm. And my sister, I think hers was, and I came out 31% Irish. We might have talked about this either before the last session or during the last session, but I came out 31% Irish, which I knew we were a little bit Irish. My sister has, again, an entirely different set of percentages, and she came out more Scandinavian. And it's so interesting in terms of my internal identity, what I identify with, and my actual genetic code.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it has to do with the most recent group that came, because if your Irish people came before the Swedish people did, they might have already been assimilated into American culture. Also, a lot of Irish people tried to downplay their Irishness because of the English dominance and the oppression that was happening. So whereas Swedish people might not have felt that kind of pressure to eliminate their culture and try to blend in. It also could be because of Minnesota. There might have been a lot of other Scandinavian people that had a greater percentage around you, and so it just became a lot easier to identify, or it just felt like we're just like everybody else, or I don't know. Yeah, it is interesting.
My grandmother did not speak English when she went to kindergarten. And that was true for almost everybody in those days, because the immigration was so recent to the Iron Ore Range. Mm-hmm. And so, but did she speak any Swedish to us? 2 words. One was she called my grandpa Gubba with that tone, which just means little old man, but with her intonation. And then she, certainly for me and maybe some of the other grandkids, called me Jantame, which is just my little girl, but again with the intonation about I had done something that she didn't approve of. So the only 2 words that, and when she would see her relatives, and I'm the oldest grandchild, so I was taken along with them a lot, which I liked. She would say "Hur står det till," which means "How are you?" But I didn't know what that meant until I started studying Sweden. I went, "Oh, Swedish." I went, "Oh, I recognize that." But those are the 3 onlys, which I really regret. Did your family do some?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. My Japanese grandparents, we called them Grandma and Grandpa, but then the next generation started calling all the grandparents Bachan and Jichan, which is sort of like Granny and Papa or Gramps or something, because it's a cutitization of Ba-chan and Ji-chan, which is, or Oji-chan or O-ba, there's all this There's like formal levels, like grandfather, and then there's grandpa, and then there's pappy or whatever. I don't know. There's different levels, and so everyone calls the grandparents these names. Even though my mom isn't Japanese, they call her bachan. Yeah, but there's all sorts of words. And one kind of comical one is rice crackers. If you've ever seen Japanese rice cracker, in our family, we always called them simbe, and all my cousins, everybody simbe, hammy, and it's constant simbe. Like other families had a lot of potato chips.
Yeah.
Our family's household was just riddled with rice crackers. All the various kinds. And I went to Japan and I saw what looked to me to be simbe, and I was like, "Oh, simbe." And my friend's like, "So what did you say?" I said, "Simbe." He's like, "No, it's senbei."
Oh.
Both syllables are wrong. And I'm like, well, what's senbei? And he's like, that's not a word in Japanese. It doesn't even make any sense. And I'm thinking, well, what? So senbei, that's rice. He's like, yeah, senbei. So I go home and I ask everyone, we call them senbei, right? And it's like, yeah, senbei. Well, the only theory I have is that because my Japanese ancestors came over 120 years ago.
Yeah.
They taught their children how to say it, my grandparents, and my grandparents were children as they were learning that, and it kind of gets locked in, like maybe my grandma had it wrong, or I don't know, or something, and then it just proliferates through the entire family, because I don't know other Japanese American families that call it simbe. And it's just funny to learn that you have this child. It's sort of like if you had a 4-year-old American kid who goes to Japan and he calls, I don't know, doggies like waggos or something.
Yeah.
You know how 4-year-olds are. It's
Right.
Or the twain. Look at the twain.
Yeah, right.
And then the kid
Right.
goes to Japan, and then that kid has great grandkids that think that they call a train a twain. It's like twain. I don't know where Simba. Anyway, so now I don't know what to call it, because on one hand I still want to call it Simba, but it seems wrong. I want to call it Senbei at the same time.
Right.
So that's where I'm from.
Yeah. All of those are paragraphs in this poem. I'm going to read you one in just a second. We have in Minnesota, it's really common to say ufta, which is an exclamation that can mean almost anything. It can mean delight, it can mean disgust, not said in Scandinavia. And we just
really?
assumed, it comes from No.
Well, it's a Ballard thing too.
Well, yeah, that's right. But it's not the old country. Let me flip my pages here a little bit. So when the University of Minnesota website describes using I'm from included in their course curriculum, and by the way, I've got this packet of stuff here that talks about the kinds of things that can be included, some instructions, some ideas, some prompts, and the University of Minnesota uses this for international students and domestic students to try and get some commonality factors. We used to do that in introductions. And at Antioch, when the first day of class, we'd spend a lot of time introducing them. We say, well, who else can relate to this? And then you form alliances across the room. So this information is in packet form, that if you want to see that, both in terms of, in general, the poem and specifically how it's used in academia, to write to me at Ann B. Blake, PhD, and without an E, at gmail.com. I'd be delighted to send this out. And it's because it's on my computer. It's just a document.
Ann, no E, B, the letter B, Blake, Ann B. Blake, PhD, at Gmail.
Yeah. Be delighted to do that. Totally easy. So this
or
is...
email Ann about anything.
Anything at all. I'm available. I sleep long and hard for 8 hours, and then the rest of the time I'm available. So this is from an author whose name is George Ella Lyon, Lyon. So I'm pronouncing it the way that I want to pronounce it. It might not be that. And so she talked about, and she has a website that's in this packet, and she talked about reading stories I ain't told nobody yet. let's see, by Joe Carson, who's a Tennessee writer. And so Joe Carson collected a bunch of stories from people and put it into a book. And then George Ella Leone said, I'm going to put this into a poem. So here's her poem. I'm from clothespins, from Clorox and carbon tetrachloride. I'm from dirt under the back porch, black, glistening. It tasted like beets. I'm from the forsythia bush, the Dutch elm, whose long-gone limbs I remember as if they were my own. I'm from fudge and eyeglasses, from Imogene and Elifair. I'm from the know-it-alls and the pass-it-ons, from perk up and pipe down. I'm from he restoreth my soul with a cotton ball lamb and 10 verses I can say myself. I'm from Artemis and Billy's branch, fried corn and strong coffee. I'm from the finger my grandfather lost to the auger, the eye my father shut to keep his sight. Under my bed was a dress box spilling old pictures, a sift of lost faces to drift beneath my dreams. I'm from those moments, snapped before I budded, leaf fall from the family tree.
Well, now I'm intimidated because there's no way I'm going to write anything like that. That's too scary.
It is fantastically beautiful, isn't it? I mean, she's a writer.
Okay. Like, I'm thinking, I'm from Sammamish, Washington, where I think they did a lot of logging in the past, but I'm not quite sure. Don't pressure me. I'm not looking it up. I'm also from a Japanese American, like, and then you read something like that, and it's like, what? I mean, that's not the expectation, for crying out loud.
So it's personal, it's creative. And what I meant to say earlier is during this time, take 30 seconds of centering yourself, getting all your molecules in one place by anything like quietus, meditation, prayer, watching your thoughts float by, and just begin to start to write. And let me read you a couple from mine. Again, I like to write and I like to wordsmith. And so my first paragraph is, I'm from Ann Beth Fouts by birth. I'm from Ann Beth Drinkwitz by adoption. I'm from Ann Beth Blake by choice when I married, taking my maternal grandfather's name. And then I do the land acknowledgement for Hibbing, Minnesota, the Anishinaabe, known in English as the Ojibwe. And I give the land acknowledgement from my West Seattle home to the Duwamish. I'm from iron ore mined in deep canyons in the earth. Iron ore, the versatile strengthening ingredient in rebar and I-beams, forming the inner and under steel skeletons of vehicles, bridges, and buildings. I'm from a New Year's Eve birth, from everyone in the world celebrating my birthday, and from taking stock of my life at the end of each year. So I start out with exactly who birthed me, although I don't give their names in that first paragraph, and the land acknowledgement, and the land that I came from. And then for me, it just flowed. And yours was perfectly beautiful and wonderful. You had an attitude in there that you could, set aside. And setting aside that sort of disparaging attitude, it's beautiful. And personal. Don't make me look it up. See, those are the details. They're just splendid. It's your poem.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Huh. So I'm sure this goes a lot of different places because, you could also just start with, I'm from the here and now. I am right here, and I'm from my feelings and my hopes and my aspirations and the love of my cat, and I'm from my thoughts and my self-love and my self-hatred and whatever, there's a lot of different directions you can go. Yeah.
And probably starts out with, like Leon did about the land and the house and the soil and the trees and the plants and stuff, and then the more personal, emotional stuff. I'm from a father who left me and returned for my 4-month baptism. That's I'm from. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm from a father who adopted me right away after marrying my mother. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The place that I go is, I'm from the woods in my neighborhood because I spent so much time there with my friends. Yeah. That's what I feel like when I think of where I'm from. because that's all we did was just go into the woods. Because you go into the woods, one, there's so many things to do, and two, there's no adults.
Yeah, right.
We could do whatever we wanted.
Yeah.
And we did.
Yeah.
So the whole neighborhood had woods intermingling, right? And the adult spaces were actually smaller than the kids' spaces.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Brings lots of memories to my mind. Yeah.
There was this one moment where we were playing really late into the night, and it was dark, and we were in the woods. No flashlights or anything, it was just us. And we heard one of our parents trying to find us. And we could kind of hear them calling through the woods, and then we hear them kind of scrambling. They're like, where are you? And we just thought how funny it was because they seemed so inept. Where for us, it was second nature to know how to navigate through the woods. And it was a very foreign, difficult terrain for them.
Yeah.
And so that's where I'm from.
And this whole time, as we start talking about this format, it's just so evocative. All the things that you've said so far and all the things that I've said so far are these little paragraphs in the poem. So as you listen back to the podcast, you can just start typing into your computer all these little things. You just put an I'm from and from in front of all of them if you want to. I mean, it's just a format.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. When you first talked about this, I was thinking that for myself and maybe others, it feels, I don't know, I'm sure there's a narrative therapy intervention that is along these lines as well, that we don't get a chance to really concentrate on our narrative.
Yes.
It's there, but it's not really explicitly focused on or enhanced or explored enough. And there's a lot of benefit to it, a lot of self-esteem, knowing who you are, instead of being constantly focused outside of yourself. What does my boss want? What do my kids want? What does society want from me? It's like, well, who am I?
Yeah.
And without knowing that, then
what informs me? What are in addition to my genomes, what else informs who I am? I often talk about the rings in a tree in terms of the multiplicity of us. And I also talk about, one time I thought I had, my wrist was hurting. I didn't think I had something. My wrist was hurting, and I went in and they took an X-ray. And he said, well, at least we know you don't have you've never had any broken bones in your arm. I said, how do you know that? And he said, well, no matter how well the mend, there's always a line that shows where a break was. And so those kinds of things that are endemic to me and to each of us, that are sometimes visible to the outside and sometimes not, and sometimes knowable to us and sometimes not. So the Johari window has a thing about, I know, it's a grid, it's a square grid, and the top are four sections, and over the top, the two columns is, I know, I don't know. And then the side rows are, you know, and you don't know. And all of that informs the more that I disclose and you tell me what you are experiencing, the bigger my I know gets. And so that the bigger my consciousness gets. So that part of being human beings, where as we write this, I just know more things about myself. And sometimes I complain about the narrative of my life and feel sort of victim-y about it. We were talking about that before we got on air. And so this is much more descriptive than complaining, because I'm a moderately good complainer and pouter.
Right. In therapy, if you're asking a client about their childhood, it's implied and maybe even requested that the client talk about the difficulties.
Yeah.
But if it's just I'm from, then you go where you want to go.
And some of these are difficulties.
Yeah.
And it's more objective isn't quite the right word, because that to me is like kind of removed from me. It's very subjective to me, but it's also descriptively subjective or subjectively descriptive.
Yeah.
I just love this format.
Yeah, I would imagine with a difficult childhood, it would be included, but I don't think people typically would globally say that's the only thing that I'm from. there would be a lot of other details that enhance or point out the strengths and the foundation and the things that the individual positively values.
Yeah. I think of the yin-yang. If I had a tattoo, which I'm not ever going to get, but if I did, it would be the yin-yang. And it would be in green and red because those are my favorite colors. But that light with a dot of dark and that dark with a dot of light, that's just
My
fantastic.
dad would just see one circle of color of some sort. He's red-green deficient. As an artist, by the way.
Yes, that is one of those things that those colors are particularly
Just a small little funny story about my dad. My dad bought a suit. He would wear a suit to work, and he gets this suit at Nordstrom and comes home, and my mom sees it on him, and she's like, "Whoa!" In her mind, she's like, "Wow, that's quite a suit. It's, that's different." And my dad's saying, "Huh?" He's like, "Oh, thanks." And my mom is seeing the color. It's like a pinkish color.
Oh, really?
But my dad sees gray.
Yeah.
So I can't remember if my mom knew that he didn't know or just didn't want to say anything. And then for years he would wear that suit, and everyone would be like, "Oh, Alan, that's a good looking suit," because it just doesn't look like something he would wear.
Right.
And then years later, someone says, "Oh, that's a nice, it's a pink color." He's like, "Pink? What are you talking about?"
They let me wear this all those years.
So, yeah, he inadvertently was quite flashy because he was
right.
red-green deficiency.
That's one of my favorite words, inadvertent. I do inadvertent napping.
Do we ever advertent anything? It's always inadvertent.
I know,
we never advertently do anything.
Right. We'll have to start that. It's a new trend. You heard it now, right here.
I am advertently podcasting right now.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Advertently talking with each other. One of the things you mentioned is when people have a lot of trauma or pain, both physical, emotional, and all the other kinds of things in their childhoods. One of the things the University of Washington, I keep saying Washington, University of Minnesota guidelines for their curriculum talk about is to really be cautious about that and to tell people you don't have to tell the magnum opus. Start with the easy things, the direct things, the not so. We can get to the other things, but this is a classroom.
Yeah.
So to set it up that way. And certainly if we use it in our master's classes, we would always set it up to say, here's the deal. And
what do you mean in the classes?
Well, like when I would start, I would do what I called a virtual name tag. And so it had a person's name in the middle. And sometimes we did it physically, but sometimes just imaginally. And then one of the things is a safe secret. So don't do your worst thing that you've ever experienced, and especially from the outside, but something a little bit vulnerable and probably no one else knows, just to get to know each other well. Mm-hmm. So to couch it rather than to say, don't do your worst awful thing that ever happened to you.
Yeah.
You can do your best.
Yeah. Like I like to pee in the pool or something. I don't, by the way. It's been there's a reality TV show I was watching, and one of the individuals was saying that she likes to pee in the pool, or she does pee in the pool. And everyone was quite shocked by that.
Yes, and disgusted at the same time.
Yeah, because why? Just go to the toilet. What's wrong with you? Yeah. And so then you add a lot of other
So then there would be which year are you? How many quarters in are you? And I don't remember the third thing. And then we would do the class generate something for the fourth corner that they would share together.
Oh.
Yeah.
I did a version of this. What is the prompt? I come from?
I'm from.
When I was developing some new content for our website, trying to revise it, make it better.
Yeah.
A consultant asked me to write a biography of myself and a biography of the podcast. And I sat down to write it, and I found it a real challenge and fun, actually, as well, to write it as comprehensive and as concisely as possible, because you don't want to write like an entire book on a website, just on a About Us page, right?
Sure.
So I spent a lot of time thinking about, okay, what are the story beats here, and how do I emphasize it, and how do I say it briefly, and how do you say it in word form? And I spent, I don't know how many drafts and time, and I also grabbed a bunch of pictures to kind of show that chapter or something, and it was really gratifying, actually. It reminds me that I should probably put it on the website now that I'm done with it. But it's
good idea.
It was nice, and along these therapeutic lines, it served a lot of helpful psychological purposes for me. One is just to have that encapsulated in one spot. I think that's one of the things about narrative therapy or these kinds of exercises.
Yeah.
I'm sure art therapy has this kind of element as well. When it's swimming in our minds, it's there, but it's sort of amorphous and ethereal, and then you put it into one spot, and it doesn't define the whole thing, but you can look at it.
Yeah.
It's like me and my wife are taking ceramics, and there's this moment when you finish a vase or a cup or something, and glaze it, and it comes out of the kiln, and you just look at it. It's a thing that you did, a physical thing. And to put an abstract thing such as a life into a written form, you can just sort of like, there it is, But also it gave me a chance to honor certain people and things, to define as like, I want to include this person or this event, and I want to highlight that as important, because there's a lot of things I could talk about, but what do I want to honor? And to have that person know that I'm honoring them, like my wife, for example, and that also felt good to be able to give or connect or something. Also, if people are going to read it, it feels good, like press people might say, what's up with this guy? And they go to the thing and they read the thing, and it feels good to be able to tell your own story instead of have people make up a story for you. At least give your version of it, gives you a chance to kind of get out ahead of any misunderstandings or something. So and that's just a public facing thing. Imagine if you're just doing it on your own and able to go in all the directions. I think there's a lot of helpfulness to that.
And all those things, all those autobiographical things are incredibly, I think, useful, and getting them organized. During the pandemic, during the quarantine, I got all my ducks in a row for the end of my time. So I got a foot marker for the family plot in the graveyard. I did my obituary. I put some photos together for a slideshow if they want to do that. I've got the songs for my service, and I just added a couple of weeks ago Auld Lang Syne, because my birthday's New Year's Eve, so it's like, well, that's got to be played. And so... Is
that going to be the last song? It feels like it should be the last song.
Right. And I wrote a poem for my funeral. It must be my great-great-grandmother came from Sweden, because my great-grandmother, my maternal grandfather's mother, she made crossword puzzles, and she wrote, and he wrote this wonderful poem for her funeral, which we read at all of our funerals. So I read it at my mom's funeral, and so I'm definitely having that. And then I wrote one of my own as an addition to my great-grandmother's.
So that's a similar exercise,
Absolutely.
But way more meaningful and deep. That's interesting. So you wrote your own obituary, and you've planned your own memorial, which is great, because then people don't have to wonder. It's like, well, this is what she wanted.
My mother was very organized in that way, and we, of course, were shocked and grieving her loss, and so we didn't have to generate that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It was an incredibly wonderful gift that she gave us.
Have you even picked a venue for your memorial?
I go to church, and so I'm a church member, so it'll be at my church.
Okay. That's interesting. Yeah, I imagine most people don't do that. Even people that are fully accepting of their death. We talked about Paul, and did we talk about Paul and his suicide coming up? Did we talk about that?
No.
Oh, so he was on the podcast, and so I'm not saying anything that he doesn't mind being out there, but he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and he was at a stage where he was being told that if he wants to begin the process of assisted suicide, that he needs to get on it because it's a paperwork nightmare to some extent.
Right. And you have to be of sound mind at the moment.
Right, at the moment. So you can't get the process going and then become incompetent later. You have to do it while you're still aware you're doing it, which I find to be, I don't know, a little barbaric to some extent. It's like, to me, in a perfect world, if I were in those shoes, I'd say, I consent that when I can't pass this test, this simple test of cognition.
Ooh, that's good.
Then just take me behind the shed and shoot me in the back of the head. Like, just, or, I don't know, push me off a cliff into the water. I don't know, like, or wait till I'm asleep and inject. I don't like just.
They do have meds these days.
But don't tell me, because I don't. I'm going to be out of my mind.
Right. Exactly.
But I don't want to.
Yeah.
I don't want to lose the time I have.
Yeah.
While I'm still competent, I want to squeeze but talking with Paul, he's pretty determined, and he went through this with his own mom and grandma, I think, and doesn't want to impose that. There's so many consequences, not only just the cost and all the uncertainty, but there's huge psychological cost. You watch your husband just become a different person or become extremely unhappy.
Sometimes they get violent.
Yeah. So it's not ideal. And he can't do it in North America. He has to go to Europe, to Switzerland, and that's what he's planning on doing. And the plan is that it'll happen this fall.
Because we have death with dignity here in Washington State.
Yes, but you have to
different?
consent at the time. So, and you have to be 6 months terminal.
Oh, there are those parameters.
I mean, that's what Paul was saying. And in Canada, it's, I think, similar. So the only place where you can do it without being imminently terminal is in Europe and maybe other places as well. I'm not sure. But so that's what he's doing. And I don't know for him if he has done all that you've already done, like the memorial planning and I'm guessing he will. I don't know. But he's doing a lot of other planning, because he knows his son and his daughter-in-law is going to be there, his wife's going to be, he's had they'll be right there by his side, which I find to just be, I mean, what are you going to do? But it's that's hard, the whole thing is hard. And you knew Paul really well, and so yeah.
So what an amazing gift you offer to your listeners, the range and depth and breadth of your podcast topics.
Yeah, I guess so. I just always talk with people I want to talk to. That's it. I don't really have an overall plan. There's not a lot of podcasts that have the amount of randomness that we do. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't really care if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I just, but yeah, I mean, quite a thing to process for myself with Paul. Pretty. Talking about it right now, I'm just reminded of how complicated my feelings are about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Paul is quite just matter of fact about the whole thing. I keep asking him about how are you doing, how are you feeling, and he's like, just annoyed that the paperwork takes so much time and it's hard to get all the things together, and there's always another hoop you got to jump through, and I'm just worried that it's not going to happen fast enough, and my Alzheimer's will. It's just this single-minded focus, and I don't know, but if I were in his shoes, I would just be having some pretty dark moments.
Absolutely. And we do this thing about, I have it on my refrigerator, there's some acronym that says, don't resuscitate me under these conditions. Mm-hmm. But that's physical.
Right.
And the intellectual, cognitive, emotional, that's a whole different place that the world doesn't cover. So you were saying a moment ago about kind of the form and flow of the podcast, which I very much appreciate, because I've got this whole pamphlet in front of me. I always like to be over-prepared than under-prepared, just in case we have radio silence and something needs to be said. And I have a experience of that as a high school student. And I appreciate you got immediately conversational. I was reading some stuff and you got immediately conversational. That's what I appreciate. This is the give and take of conversation.
Another way of putting that is I keep interrupting you. So
that's not my experience.
The shadow side is interruption.
Yeah.
So if you have more, please continue.
I want to read just a few more things. Again, this booklet I think is very helpful and useful. And for anybody who wants to have it, please contact me at annbblake.phd at gmail.com. But let me read a couple more just to give you some ideas, and because I just like my writing. I talked about my first father disappearing very quickly and my second father coming along and who adopted me. So one of my paragraphs here is, I'm from one of 4 siblings experienced as whole instead of half. I'm from 2 miscarried siblings and 1 stillborn sister. I'm from 1 nephew and 1 niece. I'm from 1 foster daughter and 1 granddaughter. So we're a really small family. I'm from my oldest brother Dan's beyond brightness, who provided room and board and computer while I wrote my dissertation, and from our shared lightheartedness and interest in the arts and politics. I'm from my sister Mary's close companionship, our experiencing cultural events, her help with numbers, her version of our dad's dry and witty sense of humor, and our capacity to talk endlessly. I'm from my youngest brother Larry's early adorable blonde curls, and our traditions of Wampak's breakfast and movies and theaters, and from shared feeling orientation. I'm from my dryly witty nephew Ryan, and a courageously persistent and tenacious niece Julia, both of whom bring joy and challenge to my life. I'm from my foster daughter Serena's integrity and groundedness, and from my granddaughter Kira's social consciousness and open-heartedness. And when you were talking about being out in the woods, I have another paragraph to add in here. I'm from walking 6 blocks to Cobb Cook Elementary School for an outdoor skating rink, and to the Memorial Building every Saturday morning for indoor skating. I grew up skating. That was the big deal. Of course, we only did it in the wintertime.
How very Minnesota of you.
Pardon? Yes,
how very Minnesota.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely, yeah. And going to lakes for swimming. We all had to swim in order to graduate from high school. We should have had to swim before getting out of elementary school. That would have been a smarter idea. So thank you for giving me another paragraph. And let me do just a couple more. I'm from Minnesotan and familial, don't call attention yourself. Do it the right way. And if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. I'm from clutter, supper left on the stove, and responsibility for my 3 siblings. I'm from Sloppy Joe's, gritswurst, walleye pike, Dad's cookie sheet meatloaf, creamy mashed potatoes, and Christmas Eve rice pudding.
Walleye pike? Is that a pike?
Oh my! It's the best fish on the planet for me. It's sort of halibut-like, only softer. And it's just incredibly delicious. Yeah.
I don't think I've ever had pike.
Oh, it's good.
That's a Great Lakes fish.
Yeah, and lakes in Minnesota.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a great fish.
And what was the second one? Wurst, some kind of
gritswurst from my adoptive dad's family. It's actually head cheese from pigs, and my grandmother
What's head cheese?
Made it. I know.
What is that? Is that fat?
It's fat and and meat from the head, and then lots of spices. It's the best thing. And the way we did it, my grandmother would make it, and we would go there every summer. And she froze it in those kind of plastic milk cartons that we used to get. They were square and tall milk cartons, and she would freeze it in that. And then we would bring it home, and we would scrape off a bit and fry it in a frying pan on the stove and put it on white bread. Oh.
And there's no cheese in head cheese.
There's no cheese in head cheese.
It's more like head meat.
Head meat
Like
from
meat
a pig.
From a pig.
And delicious. Oh, my gosh. I called it wish-wash when I was a kid because I couldn't say gritswurst. But, And several of my cousins have tried to make it, one with pretty good success. So in the town, there's pizza and patizza. And
Patizza?
Patizza is this wonderful rolled dough with wonderful spices in it. So it's rolled like a jelly roll, only tighter and with a flour base.
That's like a breadstick or a bread?
No, it's bigger than that because it's rolled and rolled and rolled. And then cinnamon and cardamom and those kinds of spices.
Oh.
It's just incredibly lovely. And then porchetta is also rolled meat, pork, but maybe it's more like the consistency of turkey, but I think it's pork. And again, rolled and with spices in it. And then we had pasties. So all these peas were in my town. Pasties were for the miners, and they're like chicken pot pies, only they're beef. And they were made more like there's a Mexican dish that's starts with a C. Anyway, it's like a pie, but it's not in a dish. It's more like on a sheet pan. And then the men took them in some kind of a container and took them to work.
Like stew inside of a pie crust.
Exactly. What a wonderful description. Oh my gosh. And the Finnish church kitty corner from my grandma's house made them one day a week, and it was the biggest treat to go and get a pasty. Ugh.
I love those kinds of dishes and the history, because like sushi has a similar kind of history. It was, you would put rice and put vinegar to preserve and what I think as a preserve, I don't know. And then you'd put the fish down, and then you'd put the seaweed down, like in a barrel, and you'd pack it all in, and you just layer after layer as a way of keeping it fresh for travel, salt, keeping it fresh for travel. And then you would cut out bits, and it would kind of look, I guess, kind of the way sushi would today. And then eventually it just becomes more formalized and sought after for even just people in restaurants and that kind of thing, or with spam musubi in Japanese American culture, because we were in the prisons in World War II in the United States, and they gave us army rations, and the only meat protein that we had was things like spam, was canned meat. And so the Japanese Americans would just incorporate that into their regular food, and normally they would put some other meat or fish, and so they just put it into that, and now we have spam musubi, or what people might look at as spam sushi. So things emerge out of necessity. So you think of these guys in the mine. You can't bring a bowl of stew, but you can bring a pasty, something where the stew is contained. And you think of the wives wanting to allow the husband to bring a little bit of home with him, and to put love into the, it's not just slop together. It's like you spend some time and here you go, honey. And you just think of that as you're eating that dish,
My brother, one sibling still lives in Minnesota, and he and his partner just went to he belongs to the Eastern Star. And one of the fundraising things is once a year to make pasties. And so he bought 20 of them, and he just ate the last of the 20. It was so sad. So your family members were in the camps,
mm-hmm.
in the prison concentration camps is what they were.
Mm-hmm.
Ay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, did your Swedish people come here from the famine? I think we might have talked about that.
They certainly came from poverty. Yeah.
Because I don't know specifically, but I'm pretty sure, because the time lines up in 1870 of a horrible famine that was happening in Sweden and maybe throughout Europe. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
but,
yeah. The economics were awful.
yeah. People were dying from starvation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My great-great-great-grandfather came right after, not right after, but soonish after his wife died in childbirth. That little girl only survived 5 years and brought his first son really quickly, and then my grandmother, and then one son stayed in Sweden and then brought his youngest son over. And one son came momentarily to my hometown and talked about Auntie Britta. And Helen, which is my grandmother. So he knew my grandmother, and then he was here in 1924, and my mother was born in 1921. So he knew my mother as a little girl, and then he went back to Sweden. It's just like, oh my goodness! Again, it gets three-dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it just feels, as Americans, we are probably the most ancestor denying culture of all time. Other people listening in other countries probably are thinking, well, yeah, I mean, of course you honor the ancestors. Of course you know where you come from. Of course you know those stories. They're well told and understood. Jewish people, for example, it's often part of the Sabbath ritual to incorporate that knowledge. Like in places in East Asia, there'll be an altar dedicated in the living room that will just have all the ancestor pictures and offerings, and you're just in this visual space with the ancestors. And with Americans, because of we're a country of immigrants, it is harder to hold on to any cultural element, and the demand from the dominant culture to blend in or else. So you just discard, and without something that you can replace it with, you're just in this abyss of cultural protocol. And so we have to kind of, as Americans, go against the grain by thinking about these kinds of things and finding them. And because, these other cultures didn't do what we're doing just because they wanted to or because of tradition. There's a reason why these traditions were in place, because there's a tremendous apparent psychological value to understanding this and talking about it and valuing it and mulling it over. What does this mean? Even if your history is filled with shame, I was lucky when I looked at my white ancestors and found no slave owners, and only found the opposite. It was all Northerners, and they all my ancestors fought on the right side of each war. And I even have Quaker white people in North Carolina that were part of, because the Quakers in general, I mean, I don't know if my Quakers, but, the Quakers in general were adamantly against slavery way, way back, because Quakers are all about level hierarchies. Quakers don't have a hierarchy even within their own church, and probably participated in the Underground Railroad. So so I lucked out. But even if you have a slave owning ancestor, that doesn't mean that you have to be ashamed of yourself. It just means that that's a part of your story. What do you do with that, right? What does that mean? How does that inform you? And what does that tell about your mission in life or recognition of something? Like for someone, I could imagine them saying, I know that about my history, and therefore I think that's why I'm so involved in helping the underprivileged, because I am trying to make up for what happened, not because of guilt, but because I want to. It's a part of, right? I'm not doing it because I'm being shamed. I'm doing it because that's a part of my story. It's just a black mark on myself. I just, because I have this in my history, I understand it better. I didn't do that thing. I'm not to blame for it.
And acknowledging the whole truth.
Right.
Again, that 360-degree spherical truth.
Right.
So if during the airing of this podcast, people are writing some I from statements and paragraphs and pages, it's not an interactive thing, so they don't call in and say, let me share this with you. And they shared so many things about the last time we were talking together. I hope people write some of those in, and I know you'll share with me because you did.
Or email directly to
Ann B.
Blake, PhD at gmail.com.
Good. Yes, to put me in the picture as well.
So what's the final word here, Ann?
Well, let me read you the final page, not final page, but the final couple paragraphs here on mine. So I'm from an introverted internal childhood and from an adult extroverted push that is sometimes glib. I'm from three-dimensional emotional topography, occasionally dramatic and uncentered, mostly deeply soulful and keenly observant. I'm from realization of an exaggerated sense of deprivation and neglect. I'm from consistent and diligent investment in my inner and outer lives to redeem and transcend primary traumas. I'm from conscious effort to be more frequently and more fully present to clients, students, supervisees, friends, and to everyone. I'm from a well-rounded and broad spectrum of talented professionals who support my ongoing emotional development and my physical well-being. I'm from slight surprise about and deep gratitude for the fully rounded and satisfying adult life I created.
That's nice. I like that.
Thank you. I just, again, it's one of my favorite things, and I'm joyful in sharing it and encouraging other people to do it. And our conversation has been all about that, all about the autobiography.
Well, yeah. So let us know where you are from, and
Please.
Also how it feels to think and explore that, because I love that kind of stuff, and Ann does too. And
Absolutely.
I think we all deserve to. It's almost part of self-care. It's a part of focusing on ourselves. And imagine there's some people out there that have never had that space to do that.
And I will share anything I get with you as well as you're sharing with me. So if anything comes my way, it's coming your way too.
And everyone out there, please take care of yourself, because
yeah, you deserve it.